You live inside a bubble, not a metaphor, a real physical structure, a vast region of solar wind surrounding the sun and every planet in its orbit, pressing outward against the interstellar medium of the galaxy. Inside it, the Earth, the other planets, the comets, every spacecraft ever launched. Outside it, cosmic rays and interstellar particles, the raw galactic environment that our bubble quietly deflects. The bubble is the reason life's chemistry was not disrupted long before it had a chance to begin. You have lived your entire life inside this structure. You do not know what it looks like, not because no one has tried, because we have never been able to see it from the outside. Every probe we have launched, every Mars lander, every Jupiter flyby, every spacecraft that crossed the outer solar system was launched sideways, in the plane, all of them skimming the equator of our own neighborhood, while the space directly above and below remained, for every practical purpose, out of reach. We have photographed a black hole 55 million light years away. We have landed instruments on a comet. We have close-up images of Pluto's nitrogen glaciers taken from 7,700 miles up. We cannot tell you what shape the thing we live inside actually is. This is the story of the one direction we have barely explored, what waits up there, and the maneuver so counterintuitive it requires a spacecraft to fall toward the sun before it can climb away from it. And it is the story of the man who described that maneuver in 1929, decades before anyone understood why it would matter. The prison you inherited without knowing, sideways, around the sun at 30 kilometers per second, your planet is tracing the same horizontal arc it has traced for 4.5 billion years. You did not choose this. You were born into it. Every building, every person, every rocket on a launch pad inherits this motion automatically, a gift from the solar system's formation that nobody asked for and nobody can return. For most destinations, the inheritance is an advantage. Missions to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond all benefit from Earth's existing momentum. Engineers nudge the trajectory by a few kilometers per second in the right direction, and Earth's motion carries the spacecraft most of the way. Going around the sun is so easy, we have been doing it continuously and accidentally since the planet formed. The problem begins the moment you want to go perpendicular, straight up, out of the flat disk the planets all share, directly above or below the sun. To go that way, you first have to stop going the other way. Every bit of the 30 kilometers per second you inherited must be canceled before you can begin to climb. Then you must add new velocity to actually rise. The total energy bill, measured in the unit mission designers call delta V, is roughly 30 kilometers per second, just to achieve stillness in the plane, before a single meter of vertical progress has been made. Compare. Reaching Mars from Earth orbit requires about 4 kilometers per second of delta V. Going straight out of the ecliptic requires 30, nearly 8 times as much, more than the combined fuel budget of most missions ever flown. Pluto is 3.5 billion miles from Earth. The point directly above the sun's north pole is a few million miles away. Pluto is closer to reach. This is the kind of fact that should make you stop and read it again, because it inverts every intuition about distance and difficulty simultaneously. The vertical exit from our own solar system is not blocked by emptiness or obstacles. It is blocked by momentum. 4.5 billion years of sideways motion accumulated in the same direction. Impossible to undo cheaply. The man whose thesis was rejected. In 1922, a 28-year-old Romanian-German physicist named Hermann Oberth submitted a doctoral thesis to the University of Heidelberg. It was rejected. Too speculative, the committee decided. Too disconnected from practical science. Oberth published it himself. He was used to working without permission. He had been obsessed with space travel since childhood, when he read Jules Verne and began doing the mathematics on his own, without a teacher, to check whether the orbital mechanics in the novels were real. Most of them were wrong. He corrected them in the margins and kept reading. The thesis he self-published became, in European rocketry circles, foundational. In 1929, he expanded on it in a book called Ways to Spaceflight. Inside it was a principle so counterintuitive that his contemporaries largely set it aside as theoretically correct, but practically irrelevant. A rocket burn, Oberth showed, is far more efficient when performed at high velocity inside a deep gravitational well. Not marginally more efficient, exponentially so. Because kinetic energy scales with the square of velocity, the same amount of fuel produces a dramatically larger change in trajectory when burned at maximum speed. The place of maximum speed in any orbit is the point closest to the large body being orbited. At that point, you get the most from every drop of propellant you carry. The principle was mathematically clear. The applications were hard to imagine in 1929. Oberth moved on to other problems. A teenage German boy named Wernher von Braun read the self-published thesis around 1930 and wrote Oberth a letter asking if he could work with him. The correspondence became a mentorship. The mentorship became a collaboration that lasted decades, eventually feeding into the engineering lineage that produced the Saturn V rocket. In July 1969, Hermann Oberth stood on the grounds of Kennedy Space Center in Florida, 75 years old, watching a Saturn V carry 3 men toward the moon. He had written the principle that made the trajectory efficient. His name was not on the mission. He died in 1989, at 95, in Nuremberg. He did not live to see his principle become the proposed solution to a problem that, in his lifetime, nobody had yet fully articulated: how to escape the plane of the solar system and reach the space directly above and below our star. The face of the sun we have never seen. Because the vertical exit is so expensive, almost nothing has ever taken it, which means the poles of our own sun, the most observed, most studied object in the sky, remain in almost every meaningful sense a frontier. The solar poles are not peripheral. They are where the machine runs. The sun's magnetic field reverses its polarity every 11 years, a cycle that drives the solar weather, affecting every satellite, every power grid, every communication system on Earth. That reversal originates at the poles. The fastest solar wind, charged particles streaming outward at 700 to 800 kilometers per second, flows from the polar coronal holes. The entire electromagnetic environment of the solar system is governed by processes happening above and below the equator of our star. We have been watching them from the side for the entire history of astronomy. Only 2 missions have ever achieved a significant polar view. The first was Ulysses, launched in 1990, which had to fly out to Jupiter first, a detour of hundreds of millions of miles, to use the gas giant's gravity as a slingshot capable of tilting its orbit nearly 80 degrees out of the ecliptic. The maneuver worked. Ulysses gave us the first direct measurements of the polar solar wind. But the spacecraft was built with 1980s instruments, and carried no camera capable of imaging what it flew through. We measured what was there. We did not see it. The second mission is running now. Solar Orbiter, launched by the European Space Agency in 2020, has been slowly raising its orbital inclination using a series of Venus gravity assists. In March 2025, it returned the first actual photographs of the sun's south pole ever taken, images showing a magnetically tangled, chaotic region, nothing like the calmer surface visible from Earth's angle. Until last year, in the entire history of human astronomy, no instrument had sent back a real image of the top or bottom of the nearest star. The closest, brightest, most studied object in the universe, still showing us two faces we had never properly seen. To fall is to climb. Here is Oberth's principle applied to the problem we now have. You do not point the rocket upward and thrust. That approach fails. The energy required is too large, the fuel load too heavy, the physics too unforgiving. Instead, you fall. You send the spacecraft inward, toward the sun. You let solar gravity accelerate it over months, the spacecraft moving faster and faster as it descends into the gravitational well, until at its closest point, its perihelion, it is moving faster than any human object has ever traveled, hundreds of kilometers per second. At exactly that moment, at the bottom of the fall, with maximum velocity inside maximum gravity, you fire the engines. Oberth's principle converts that burn into something no burn at rest could achieve. The trajectory swings out of the plane entirely. The spacecraft rises. The fall was the launch. Solar sails extend this further. A spacecraft with an enormous reflective sail, thousands of square meters of metallic film, can use the pressure of sunlight alone to spiral inward over months without burning any propellant. Closer to the sun, the sail performs better. When the inward spiral brings the spacecraft close enough, a single Oberth burn at perihelion redirects everything upward. The combined mission, patient sail spiraling inward, single violent burn at the bottom, clean climb out of the disk, is the architecture that currently appears most viable for reaching the solar poles or escaping the ecliptic entirely. A spacecraft that has to first approach the object it is escaping in order to escape it. The counterintuitive logic of a man whose doctoral thesis was rejected 100 years ago, finally applied to a direction we have never managed to leave. The image that does not exist. If a spacecraft ever makes this journey, here is what it would see. Climbing above the ecliptic, it would leave the dust behind within months. The ecliptic plane is not clean. Billions of years of comet passes and asteroid collisions have left a thin haze of debris in the plane of the planets. On a dark night, just before dawn or just after sunset, you can see this dust yourself, a faint column of light rising from the horizon, called the zodiacal light. It is the interior of our solar system, glowing with reflected sunlight. Above the plane, that glow disappears. The sky becomes darker, cleaner, quieter than anything accessible from inside the disk. From well above the ecliptic, the solar system would resolve into the flat structure it actually is. The planets in their ring, the dust in its plane, the heliosphere wrapped around all of it in whatever shape it actually has. That last part is still unresolved. For decades, the standard model described the heliosphere as comet-shaped, rounded at the front where it pushes against the galaxy's interstellar wind, stretched into a long tail behind. In 2020, astrophysicist Hermann Oberth at Boston University published a new model based on NASA data that challenged this picture. The heliosphere, her team found, is more likely shaped like a deflated croissant. Two short, curved jets, no long tail, an architecture nobody had predicted. Both models were built from data collected inside the bubble. Neither has been confirmed from outside it. The debate is unresolved and may remain so until a spacecraft reaches a vantage no spacecraft has yet achieved. We live inside something whose shape we are still arguing about. There is a photograph that does not exist, has never existed in the entire history of looking at the sky. Not of a distant galaxy or an unexplored moon. The photograph of our own solar system, seen from outside its plane. The planets in their disk, the heliosphere in its true shape, the structure we have inhabited since before we were a species, seen whole for the first time. Every image ever taken of space has been taken from inside the disk. Every telescope, every probe, every camera we have ever pointed outward has been embedded in the same flat plane, looking sideways. The perspective from above, the view that would show us our own home, the way we have learned to see everything else, has never once been captured. The maneuver to get there was written down in 1929 by a man whose university told him he was too speculative. The mission that applies it has not yet launched. The photograph is still missing. On a clear night, when you see the zodiacal light rising from the horizon, that faint, silent pyramid of glow, you are looking at the inside of the plane we have never left. Everything we know about space was learned from in there. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.